Gracias por estar aquí. Y bueno, nuestro siguiente exponente es Steve Cunningham. Él es el creador de esta plataforma Read It For Me. Es un emprendedor, abogado norteamericano que entendió cómo tenía que cambiar la vida y generar una herramienta fácil. Gracias Steve Cunningham por estar aquí y nos va a estar enseñando cómo puedes crear todo esto. Una plataforma que tiene más de 400 resúmenes de libros ilustrados en videos. Entonces puedes aprender de una manera muy rápida. Y Steve nos va a compartir su experiencia el día de hoy. Adelante, Steve.
Thanks, Alfredo, and thanks, Diferentes, for having me here and for making the invisible visible. My name's Steve Cunningham. I'm the founder of a company called Read It For Me. And today I'm going to be talking to you about how I grew a coaching practice inside of my business to up to almost $5,000 an hour using our product. And I just want to give you some background on the company, how we evolved. And we're also going to be talking a little bit about how the world's most successful people learn, because as I'll get into in a minute, our company, Read It For Me, has some of the world's most successful leaders and business minds as customers. And so I'm going to share my screen right now and walk you through a presentation that we put together around this topic. So this is all about, like I said, growing a coaching practice to a significant rate. I was able to get it up to about $5,000 an hour. And we want to show you how you can do the same thing. So I have a couple of claims to fame, maybe infamy is a better word. I used to be a lawyer for exactly 1 week. That's a true story, but a story for another day. And I used to also read a book every single day. And we're going to talk about why I used to do that and why I no longer do that as we move through this presentation. Actually, we're going to cut that out. I'm assuming you're going to edit some of this. I think that's the only slide I'll have to cut out. When we started Read It For Me, we thought that it was going to be a service for people who wanted to be successful someday. We thought those are the types of people that we were going to attract. And as it turns out, we're actually attracting people who were already successful. So our customer base skewed towards people who were already successful. And so we like to say that we thought Read It For Me was going to be a service for people who read Forbes magazine. And as it turns out, it was actually a service for people who were in Forbes magazine. And as I went through the process of growing the business, we started to interact with some of the world's most successful business leaders. And I got a front row seat to, sorry, I'm going to clear my throat. We got a front row seat to how some of the world's most successful business leaders actually grew and developed because they were using our service. And throughout that journey, we learned a few things that allowed us to understand how they went about doing it, but also how we could tailor our service so that more and more people could mimic what they were doing. The first learning myth that we learned was that leaders are readers. And I think this is one of those things that's kind of like a half truth. Yes, leaders are probably more likely to be readers than the average person, but they don't read as much as you might think. They're not, for instance, reading 52 books a year, which is sometimes what you'll see on social media. And we found that there was a distinction between average leaders and exceptional leaders. And in particular, we noticed patterns in how they were using Read It For Me. So an average leader would have a graph that would be consistent over time. So they would consume a lot of information. Whereas we found exceptional leaders had a usage graph that was much more spiky. And what we found was that they would kind of go dark for a period of time, and when they came back in, they would be consuming a lot of information in a short period of time, and then they would go away. And as we started to ask them about this, what we found out was that they had a very particular way of going about their growth and development. And the first thing was that they were always searching for an answer to a problem that they had around one of their biggest goals. And so that was the distinction between, the first distinction that we learned between exceptional leaders and average leaders. And I like to tell a story about a gentleman by the name of Graham Weston, who started a company called Rackspace here in San Antonio, Texas. He was originally one of our customers, and actually was while I was in Toronto, Canada, which is where I am from. And I got to know Graham over time, and he actually became one of my business mentors. And so I spent a lot of time with Graham trying to unpack exactly how he used our service and how he fitted into his growth and development. And so one day he sent me an email, and the email says, "This is exactly what I do." And he had attached an image to the email. And so at first I thought it was a spam email because all it had was an attachment. There was nothing else in the body of the email. But after I got over that and realizing that if a billionaire sends you an email saying this is exactly what I do, you'd be foolish not to open it. So I took the risk. I opened that, and what was there was an image. And what he had done was taken a screenshot of an article that he was reading to try to explain how he grows and develops. And what it said was, if you're reading for growth, read to get answers on specific questions. And so that was my first inclination, or indication, I should say, that successful people learn differently than average people, because I, at the time, was reading, like I said, a book a day. I was consuming, and trying to keep on top of what books are on the New York Times bestsellers list, trying to keep on top of books that people had suggested to me. And what I realized was that was not what successful people did at all. And so what it allowed us, and actually forced us to do, was to go from summarizing the most popular business books to summarizing the books that solved the most important problems, because that was how these successful people were using our platform. But I'll give you an example. So quite often, these successful people would say, "Hey, do you have this book in your library, or do you have a book on this topic in your library?" And so when we started asking them, "Why do you want that book?" it was never because they didn't want to read the book. It was always because I have this problem right now. I need to get quick information about what do the world's top experts say about this thing, and then that will help me solve my problem. So we made a shift from summarizing the most popular books to summarizing the books that were most often asked around the topics that were along the problems that they were trying to solve. And what we found was that there was consistent patterns around the problems that they would frequently find themselves having to overcome. So that was the first learning myth. The second learning myth was that learning was about mastering concepts and ideas. And so while I was reading these books, I was diving in to try to master the concepts and the ideas in the book. And that was what most average leaders were doing as well. And what I found, another distinction between exceptional leaders and average leaders, was that the exceptional leaders were reading in order to create an action plan. The average leaders were reading as though they were in school, taking notes, highlighting things, putting things in the margin, and really just trying to get their arms around these concepts and ideas. But exceptional leaders, like I said, were trying to just find the thing that they needed in order to get into action. And so as I continued this conversation with Graham, and I expanded this image that he had sent through, I'd seen that he had highlighted this area of this article. And he said, once you get enough of an answer to act on, stop reading and start doing. And so what I understood from this conversation with Graham, and by the way, this was a conversation that I went out and validated with all the other exceptional leaders that I knew in our Read It For Me community, was that as soon as they found the answer to the problem that they were searching for, they would close the book and then get into action. So as an example, if they found a solution to their problem on page 2 of a 300-page book, they didn't keep reading page 3 and beyond. They closed the book and got into action, and then went and saw whether or not what they were doing was working, and then just continuously go through that loop. So that was the second big insight that we got from our customers. And so what we did from there was that we created something that we call micro courses, which is taking the top problems that these successful leaders found themselves dealing with, and then going out to find the top 3 books on that subject, so that when a leader came to our library, they could quickly find what the world's top 3 experts on any particular topic had to say. And so in a short period of time, they could get up to speed and then decide what to do next. And so just to give you an example, This is the micro course for having difficult conversations in our library, where we have the books Crucial Conversations, Fierce Conversations, and Difficult Conversations. And so if this is something that you're trying to wrestle with right now, which is something that almost every leader at some point needs to wrestle with, having a difficult conversation, these are the 3 books and the top 3 experts on the planet around that topic. And so you can quickly get an overview of what those people think and say will work for you. And so then we moved on to the third learning myth, which is that we learned over time that the myth was that learning is a solo activity. And what we found was that average leaders tended to do what they did in school, which was learn on their own. So they would pick up a book or listen to one of our book summaries or watch one of our book summaries, and they would do it as a solo activity. They would take notes. They would think about how to master the concepts, and whatever they were doing, they would just do it on their own. And what we found exceptional leaders doing was to get coaching and peer support. So very successful people were much more likely to have a coach, and they were much more likely to get support from their peers in this learning journey. And so what we did around that idea was we created something, and this was a couple of years ago, called masterclasses. And as we like to joke, we named it that before. Everybody named everything masterclasses. So what we would do is we made a curriculum out of all of the micro courses we had put together that would span over a year. And then once a week, we would get a group of leaders together on a Zoom call, and we would play the video, have them think about what are we going to do, what's the action plan that's going to come out of this, and then finally send them off into a breakout group to get feedback from their peers and then get them on their way. And then we would continue this week over week, working through the top problems that leaders needed to solve, whether it was in their business or in their personal life. And so that always went very well for us. And what we found, actually, when we look back at it and tallied up how much money we made from doing this with leaders, because it was a program we charged for, versus how much time I spent actually executing on the program, that is where the amount of money that I was earning through this program added up to almost $5,000 an hour. So it was a very high value activity. This was the agenda that we actually go through now. We created a new program called Action Class, which was very similar to the one we had previously. And we rolled this out during the crisis this year, as folks were trying to find ways, in particular as business coaches, were trying to find ways to stay in front of their audience throughout the crisis so that when the money started flowing again, they'd be in the right place at the right time. And so we pulled together this agenda. We gave it to some coaches. We said, use this program to stay in front of your audience. And all you got to do is go through these steps and it'll go very well for you. So we ran a beta test of that at the beginning of the crisis. It was very well received. And what came out of this was coaches wanting to do this for their communities, but also wanting to find a way to make money by doing this. And so that is where this whole program came together that I'm about to get into and show you, that we're calling Skill Academy. So this is the agenda. So we'd give an introduction to the class. We would then play one of the book summary videos on the call. We would give them some questions to answer, and I'll show you those questions in a second. Then we would send them off, and the bulk of the call would be sending them off into a breakout group where they would present their answers to those questions and get feedback from one another. And these are the questions that we would have them work through, kind of mimicking, like I said earlier, what the world's most successful people do when they're in their growth and development mode. So the first question we ask them is, what goal are you working on? The next question we ask them is, what problem is currently standing in your way? And then what's at stake if you don't solve it, to make sure they're picking a problem that they really want to solve. And then we would move on to, what are the actions you're going to take? So what idea do you think is going to help? What are the specific actions you're going to take? And when will you do this by? And so what happened over the span of the last several months was that as leaders were doing this and going through the program, we asked for feedback, of course, to see what they liked about the program. And the point I want to make, as I'm going to show you what the feedback has been from most of the people going through this program, is that none of them mentioned me. None of them mentioned, wow, what a great facilitator there was in this program. But what they were mentioning was all of the other things around it. And in particular, it was the idea that you can connect with other people who can help solve your problems. And I'm going to bring that back together into how you might be able to use this tool called Skill Academy that we have developed out of this process to reverse engineer how you get your coaching clients. And I'll describe that in a little bit. So for now, the idea was, what do they most like about these classes that people are going through? A sales rep at a Fortune 50 company said meeting new people in different industries and sharing ideas and best practices. The chief commercial officer of a mid-sized company said the ability to connect and discuss with people outside of my usual network. The director of a large company said the breakout sessions had some very good recommendations from other participants. The senior executive vice president, it's a very long title, of corporate strategy at a mid-sized company, said a forcing function to review another book and consider how I could apply it to my life. An executive director at a nonprofit said makes you reflect on how the action shows up in your life. The associate dean of a school of engineering says highly motivating to read and think through the application of the summaries with other motivated leaders. And then finally, the action class process is helping me identify actions and ideas that I can apply now. And as if you noticed, what they were all saying was what the world's most successful leaders do in the growth process. They're working on problems, they are coming up with action plans, and they're doing it with other people. And again, the thing to realize here was that there was nothing about this had anything to do with me. I was just the one bringing them together, and then the process itself was really what held the glue in that whole process together. And so we created a platform throughout the crisis called Skill Academy to see whether or not we could create what we would call a peer advisory group experience around this process, and to put that in the hands of coaches so that they could repeat what I had done previously when we had called it master classes. And so I'm going to show you that now. And so this is a beta group that we had during the crisis. And what I want you to imagine is that across the top here are a lot of the things that leaders say they want to get better at. So things like emotional intelligence, creating a culture of learning, managing performance, hiring, decision-making, collaboration, coaching, execution. And we also have two other streams in here, one for personal development, where the competencies change a little bit to things like willpower, persuasion, creating possibilities, negotiation, difficult conversations, and so on. And so as we click into this and we go into view training, what you'll see is that this has the top, again, those top 3 books around that topic that we're working on here. And so the idea that we placed into the hands of the coaches that we were working with was, if we create this platform for you, we fill it with all of the things that we know leaders around the world want to get better at, and then allow you to set a price for creating this group. This platform would allow you to do all that and give you a place where you can help these leaders engage with one another around these topics. And so a couple of other things to point out. As we worked through this program, we created a rating scale in this platform that would allow folks to move beyond just consuming information and getting into action. So we wanted to make a visual way for them to track where they were in their progression across all of these items. And I'll go back to this difficult conversation one, just to give you a sense of what this actually is. So 0, if you rated yourself a 0 on this skill, it would mean that you haven't been exposed to this idea before. If you gave yourself a 1, this would mean I've had some training or some knowledge on the skill, but I don't have a personal practice. And so we kind of created this idea of a personal practice to mean if you cannot articulate exactly what you do in this area, it's unlikely that you're actually doing anything around it. And so this is where most learning and development programs usually stop, which is you've consumed some information and they leave the rest up to chance. maybe people will go apply it and maybe they won't. And what we know is that the vast majority of people never take the next step, which is how exactly am I going to solve a problem using this competency? And so anything beyond a level 1 in our system means that you have a personal practice. And I want to give you just an example of what one of my personal practices are, just so you can get a sense of what that would look like. So around employee motivation, if I go in, what you'll see is that I've documented, here is how I go about motivating the people that work with me and work for me. And so I've put in, here is exactly what I do. So I go in, I have the people who work for me fill out a goal survey around the 12 top areas of their life they want to grow and develop in. And what I've found is that people have a really hard time with more conceptual, abstract ideas like, where you're going to be in 5 years, or what's your purpose, things like that. But they're very clear on, if you just ask them, what are your goals in all these areas? They're very quick. They know what they are. And if they don't know what they are, sometimes they'll create them on the spot. So what happens when you put all of these things together is you have a really clear view of what somebody wants to become, who somebody wants to become. And so I take that information and then I ask them 3 drill down questions of, can you tell me more about that? Why is that important to you? And how can I help? And what ends up happening is we have an incredibly rich conversation where I understand them more as people. They understand that I care about them more as a cog in a machine, but as a person. And now I have a lot of the information that I need in order to truly motivate them to do the things that we want them to do as it relates back to our company goals. And so what I want to say about this is not that this is the best way to motivate your employees, but it is that I know exactly how I do it. And that becomes very valuable to the rest of the people in a group like this, as they can start to see what the other people in the group do across these areas. And so it becomes a best practice sharing network. And what the process for creating this group is, so you would go out, you would find people who would be interested in being in a group like this, have them sign up for the program, and then as they're working their way through these competencies, you would host once in a while a group coaching call. And it could be once a week, it could be once a month. You know, as I described earlier, I was doing these once a week, and that made enough revenue to get that up to about $5,000 an hour. Most of the coaches that we are working with do this group coaching call about once a month. And so it's a way for you to continuously bring users back to this set of competencies using the content that we have created. Or you can fill this with your own competency model. If you have created a course or a program that people have been through, you can put it in this format as well, and then walk them through developing themselves in that competency model. And so the last thing is, so this becomes much easier to sell when you're a coach than trying to sell your generic coaching services. So if you're selling, this is a group of CEOs that are getting together once a month or twice a month to solve each other's problems, and we're going to be learning from some of the best business books in the world. That becomes a process that is compelling on its own. So you don't have to sell your coaching services on the front end. But what happens when they start developing their scores in all of these areas, you then get a very clear idea of what people are trying to accomplish, where they might need help, and then you can then develop a laser targeted pitch to them so that what you're providing them is a solution to their problem. And people always pay much more for a solution to a concrete problem that they're trying to resolve right now than they will for generic coaching services. And so the feedback that we've been getting from the coaches we've been working with has been, they have all closed one-on-one group coaching, or sort of one-on-one coaching clients using the platform. Also, group coaching clients come out of this. So, a company might hire you to come in and do group coaching for them. And so it's a really great way to understand where somebody is in their journey, what they say they're struggling with, and exactly how you can help. So we kind of put the group coaching up front, using it as a tool to get to know these people better over time, provide them value, make money while you're doing it, and then turn those into more lucrative coaching clients along the way. And so if you want to learn more about this program, you can simply send me an email to steve@readitfor.me, and I'm happy to walk through this with you personally so that you can understand more about what we do to help coaches develop thriving group coaching practices. And we also hope you enjoy the 1-year membership we've partnered up with Divergentes to give to you, and we'll see you inside the Read It For Me community soon.
Espero que te haya gustado muchísimo este video y no te olvides de suscribirte y activar las notificaciones. Deja tus comentarios o preguntas porque me encanta leerlos y contestarlos. Todos. Que Dios te cuide.